those sorts of projects are kind of what can give AI a little bit of a bad name, because almost implicit in that is taking away jobs. The good news is, for the most part, that's not actually the way reality works. What happens is you automate part of the job, or you augment a human and let them focus on the more nuanced things, and the AIs can do the more repetitive tasks.
So don't get me wrong, I love the idea of automating more of the mundane tasks with AI. I just don't find the topic that interesting to do a podcast on. I just think we're all using ChatGPT and Gemini. We all know the potential of what it can do. And every now and then there's some disruptive things that happen, but by and large, it's just not that interesting. What really excites me about the potential of AI is curing things that we haven't been able to solve in humanity, like cancers, like MND, like heart disease. And in previous episodes, I've touched on some of this, but it's not easy to get access to people who are at the forefront of delivering AI-based technologies that help solve some of the biggest problems that we have in humanity. Which is why it was really weird in the conversation with one of the co-founders of Kung Fu AI, Greene, that the conversation shifted from automating AI tasks within enterprises as one of the leading consultancies on AI to shifting to a conversation around breast cancer screening. And it's the part of the conversation I like the most. And that's what I wanted to focus on in this episode, because this is what gets me excited. All right, everyone, welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast, and we're going to drop the gravity, here comes reality. We're going to go really practical into AI, because there is so much hype going on with AI agents and the future of AGI and these deep seeks and all sorts, but we know within companies, not everyone's as progressed as we would like to think that we are. And so I wanted to get on board Ron Greene to this conversation, who is the CTO and co-founder, or are you the founder, Ron? Why don't you introduce yourself? Welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast. Let's just get going, mate.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for having me. Yeah, Ron Greene, co-founder, CTO of Kung Fu AI. We're a US-based company that has focused exclusively on artificial intelligence for our entire history, which is over 7 years now.
You mean AI's been around for longer than 7 years?
Man, you know what? I built my first neural network in 1992, which is just crazy when I think about that sometimes.
Yeah, so how did you get started? This is a super interesting segue. What we did, everyone, so you're aware, is we created a script and we're not using it. So
yeah, perfect.
Let's go back to 92 and your neural network. Like, what were you doing that for? Well, how did you get started in AI? And then we'll get to like, what are you doing now and for the companies?
Yeah, I was doing a computer science degree at the University of Texas at Austin. And I was in my final semester, and I've told the story before, but it's 100% true, which is I was so burned out. I had like 2 classes left to graduate. I remember thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do professionally, but it's not going to involve computers, because I was done. I was toast. And I had an elective, and I took Artificial Intelligence 101, and within like 3 weeks, I was like, oh, I know, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. But I was worried. I was like, oh man, I think they've got this all figured out already. Like, I'm too late to the game.
Wow.
And, here we are 30 something years later. And it's still, I mean, we're doing amazing things now, things we would have hardly dreamed of back then, but it's still incredibly early. And most of the exciting stuff, I think, still to come.
And what happened in the 7 years of when you first started? Like, where did the aha come from with like, I think I can make a business out of this. I'm passionate about AI. Like, where did that come from?
Well, so I did the undergrad, and then I went and got a master's in artificial intelligence at Sussex in the late 90s. And then the dot-com bubble happened. And I mean, by the early 2000s, the amount of attention in AI was just about zero. I mean, there were a few, universities sort of keeping the flame alive. I sold my last company in 2017 and knew I wanted to get back into it. I'd been at artificial intelligence about a decade at that point, and I knew I wanted to do something again. Met my partner one of my co-founders, and he had this great perspective. He was like, "Look, Ron, don't do a product company." But that's all I knew at that point. I'd never done a services company. He said, "Don't do a product company. Things are moving too quickly. We could go put 18 months, 3 years, millions of dollars into a product, and it would be completely undercut by some new, advancement that gets published." And I thought, that's actually probably very likely. That was a good take. So we decided to build a service company to help basically companies adopt and implement AI, everything from like strategy to engineering. And it pains me to say this, but every year I look back and I'm like, he was more and more right. Like, damn, he really nailed it.
I love that perspective because it's like everyone would say, get into building your own product and make money while you sleep. Whereas a services company is like, sorry, you're selling hours of people time to do some of this work. And it's almost but my origin of like going way back to when I first started in marketing is I was working at HP and we were selling like enterprise services for speaking of like missing the cloud. There was a really good case study of like actually how you miss the cloud and AI all in one by one massive conglomerate in the name of HP. But yeah, it was very much around productization. And as you're talking about this now, you're like, it's a massive aha to your point. Like things are changing so radically. Why would you necessarily want to be a product owner? And it would be extremely stressful to keep up with the technological changes that have occurred in the last 3 years. Give us the
Yes.
snap. So 7 years, let's paint the picture. What are we now? 2025 at the time of recording this. If we go back 7 years, we're talking 2018. That's still pretty early AI. Siri's just dropped. There's a little bit of Alexa around, so the consumer people are probably starting to get their heads around it. Who
Right.
are you working with when you're selling this services business? What sort of companies?
We were working almost exclusively with what I'd call sort of, small, medium, mid-tier businesses, maybe 100 million to 10 billion in revenue annually. And what was really interesting then was if we were building an AI solution for our clients in 2018, 2019, they were early adopters. I mean, these were people that were on the edge and they had problems that they'd either tried to solve some other way or they had never even tried to solve because they knew that traditional, techniques wouldn't work. And so all those early conversations would kind of go like, hey, I found you guys. We've got this problem. Would it be possible to use computer vision or natural language processing or predictive analytics to solve it? And the answer almost always was actually, yeah, we could. I mean, every now and then we'd get something that was a little bit like, could you build me a time machine? But for the most part, it was really practical stuff like extracting information for documents or looking for, clinical errors in, doctor's notes or identifying manufacturing defects with computer vision, just a ton of different things. And
I thought you were going to
uh,
say understanding doctor's notes because the
yeah, oh
the
yeah, or
writing is
just even
usually
understanding.
impossible. So developing an AI to help with that,
Yeah,
just for the
we
average
don't have
person,
AI ready
awesome.
for that yet.
Still working on it.
They're still working on it.
But that's incredible. So then, yeah, really early on, there are already use cases that you're applying. Assuming you partner with like AI platforms and you keep up to breast with whatever the latest AI technology is, and then you apply the company's problem to a
Yeah.
particular solution, and away you go. What's the early successes that you had?
One of our first clients was Keller Williams, the realty company, and we worked with them for years, and we built. I think I've even lost track of how many things we did. Things like um, auto valuation models, like to try to build systems that could value property in real time across America. We things like recommendation systems, so end users could come in and say, "Hey, I'm looking in these regions, this price range. I want this type of school, or I want, this type of floor plan, or whatever." And you could. It was really fantastically successful. Things like that in the early days, recommendation engines, et cetera.
Yeah, perfect. And that are great examples of like that's like a simple use case and something that's kind of valuable, especially for evaluations, because you're answering people's questions for like what specifically they might want. What I want to do now, can you like it we said 2018. The world changed significantly. Like, and we were only talking before we came on air of like, I've been doing this podcast for a little while now, and I look back on one of my first episodes from 2020, and we were forecasting the future. This was all pre-ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. No one had really any concept. We sort of knew it was coming, but didn't know to what extent. How has your world changed in the last 2 to 3 years?
It's changed pretty significantly. Yeah, it's such a great question. So our business, we were doing, like I said, computer vision, natural language processing, et cetera. Pre 2020, computer vision was really much more advanced than natural language processing. So if we were doing a computer vision project, we could build models or use models off the shelf as a starting point and get really, really good results. Natural language was more finicky. We could still do some amazing things relative to, let's say, 2015, but it was still a challenge. And then the sort of GPT approach came out with transformers, and that really shook things up. And then with, the release of ChatGPT, sort of all hell broke loose because we went from having conversations like, hey, so you guys work in AI. How is that different than like cryptocurrency, Ponzi scheme, like just complete skepticism to now we have conversations sometimes where it's overcorrected. We'll talk to a CEO who thinks, well, ChatGPT can do anything, right? It's borderline omniscient and it's incapable of errors. So, like anything, it's a bit of a pendulum swing. I really feel so far in 2025, things have kind of settled down again. And there's sort of a general acknowledgement that like, look, AI is super hyped and we're all probably a little fatigued from the hype, but
Again.
there's no denying that there is really something substantial at the heart going on, and the biggest challenges are how to get started, how to embrace it, and that old adage, like, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." I think that's true, more true now than at any point in my professional career. And, you know, I have always been pretty optimistic about how the 2020s were gonna go for AI. And I don't mind saying this, that it's actually moving faster than I anticipated and accelerating in a way that I thought by now might slow down a little bit, but it's going the other direction.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of AI?
I'm honestly very optimistic. Now, I recognize that, some people may listen to that and think I'm being naive, but I truly would not do this if I didn't think that we have a chance to leverage what will be the most powerful technology ever invented and do things like massive leap, massive leaps in science and engineering, and that will lead to improvements um, for everybody on the planet. But I recognize, that I say that, and it may sound like I'm unaware of some of the dangers and downsides, but I'm just optimistic that we will, in the end, get this technology right.
Yeah, I think in 2025, you're not allowed to be you're not allowed to just be optimistic. You have to be optimistic with a dark cloud hanging over your head and feel really sorry for the fact that you're optimistic about the future. But for those people that might be, what I'm super interested to get into, we did talk about the fact that we need to get practical. And it's funny how you say that the pendulum has shifted from like AI being this hype thing associated with cryptocurrency. And I've experienced a lot of this in the past to now like everyone's an expert on AI and every CEO is like, I can replace my entire organization just with these AI agents in the future and I won't have anyone working for me and I'm going to make lots of money and it's always going to be accurate. Who are you selling to? Who are the primary, like, who's your audience when you're going in and having these conversations? What's the challenges that they have, and how do you help them with those challenges to bring some practical AI solutions to the table that gets them moving forward instead of this inertia at the moment of just like every department looking at each other and going, what are we going to do? And they're
Yeah.
usually like it's a cultural problem within the company as to why they can't implement it, which is why they have to go external.
Yeah. It is, it's challenging, and I'm really sympathetic for, the difficulties that companies are going through right now. It's more complicated than, like, let's say the dot-com internet revolution or the mobile revolution, because it's just a little bit almost more intangible, and the opportunities are huge, but they're not as, like, sort of directly accessible. So we didn't do this initially. Like I said, we were mostly working with early adopters, and we would focus on single pain points and solve those. Over the last 4 years, our business has really shifted as companies have gone away from, like, hey, let's solve this one problem, to, like, how can we leverage AI broadly across the entire business? And it became really clear that we needed sort of a strategic offering. And so we added strategy about 4 years. That part of our business has grown like crazy, as you might imagine. And it's really the best way for a company to go from sort of blocked, uncertain what to do, uncertain what data assets they have that may be real, uncertain what the ROI on initiatives may be, uncertain how to rank these initiatives, and there's even a lot of uncertainty around, like, well, how difficult will these things be? And so, with the strategy offering, we're able now to come in and say, look, we can't answer this today, but we can do, deep, 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 deep dive, understand your business, talk to your domain experts, come back, and essentially do a roadmap with offerings that that talk about the data journey, specific initiatives that are sort of scored against difficulty versus return on investment, and all of that. And the beautiful part about that is, at the end of that, then a company not only knows what they can do in the short term, but they also have sort of a plan, like a 2, 3 year plan on how to go and tackle this. And we've seen this over and over again, that once a company successfully executes on one AI initiative, the confidence across the entire company just skyrockets, and it becomes like, much more concrete and less, ethereal and amorphous, and they pick up a ton of momentum.
Who are you selling to? Are you selling to the CEO? Are you selling to the CTO? Are you selling to the product team? Like, does it depend on industry? But like, typically, if you're thinking about like, we're going to go in, we're going to help these organizations, who is that buyer that you need to influence to get an audit of projects done? Knowing how a lot of companies work, it's like, we can do this ourselves. And then we go round and round and round and round in circles. And it's eventually, okay, can we now go get some experts in to help us?
Yeah, we do see that a lot. We actually do see a lot of companies come to us and say, we built a bunch of stuff, it didn't get into production. But to answer your question about who we work with, it's mostly the C-suite, CEO, CTO, CIO, chief product officers, things like that. It's rare that it would be down a tier, because typically then those folks don't necessarily have the ability to take a real swing at it. If we're doing point initiatives, meaning we're solving a very isolated engineering problem, then all bets are off. It could come out of marketing or something like that, but typically
Mhm.
C-suite.
And then what's your approach when you're going into these organizations? A series of interviews, a workshop, like how do you kind of scope out projects?
Yeah, yeah, good question. My biggest fear when we started the company was, how the hell are we going to do AI when it's so data dependent? And if I was on the other end of the conversation, I would want to know something like, well, how good's it going to be? Like, how accurate is it going to be? And we're coming in and we don't know what the data assets are, and so it's very difficult to do that. So, on the engineering side, we have this beautiful methodology that essentially de-risks it by front loading data analysis and exploration, and there are sort of checkpoints at those different checkpoints, companies can um, pause or stop entirely if it just doesn't look like there's a path forward, or we can pivot, or whatever it may be. But on the strategy side, it's much more broad, because we're very much aware that, yeah, we're AI experts, but we don't understand your business, right? And there are, infinite complexities to each business, let alone, the differences across the vertical. So we'll go in, do a ton of stakeholder interviews, talk to the product teams, talk to the DevOps teams, IT, understand the data. That's one of the big ones. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure. Understand the data. These days in 2025, every company has a list of AI initiatives that they're already thinking about, even if they don't feel certain about their viability or the difficulty of them, but they've all got a soft list typically that they're looking at, and then we work with them to analyze all of those initiatives, and then typically come up with a ton they just really haven't even thought of, right? And at the end of that, there's a big strategy deliverable, and at that point they can decide where to place their bets. And I think the placing of bets, especially early on when companies haven't done anything AI, is the hardest thing because it's difficult for them to know what the odds are.
Every company knows they need to be implementing AI. They see others doing it. It feels like there's a little bit of this like fear of missing out. Like we better scramble or we're going to get completely disrupted. And I feel like we're all sort of in this race. Are there any emerging trends across companies where you're like, you've been doing this now for a little bit, and you're like, seems like there's a bit of a common initial use cases that come across most companies? What I'm trying to articulate is like, is there low hanging fruit for a company that's like, we know we need to be doing this, but we're not really doing it yet? Are there common threads across other companies that you've worked with so far that you go, look, typically a lot of people would start in this sort of area and then they might move to that and then they get more advanced? Anything like that that's popping up?
Yeah, there really are. Probably, I would say like two main sort of pillars that companies look at. One is like they've got some sort of manual process, and they have maybe hundreds or thousands of people are doing it, and they're looking at sort of like a cost center, and they're wondering, hey, is there some way we could reduce this or automate it? And that those sorts of projects are kind of what can give AI a little bit of a bad name because, sort of almost implicit in that is taking away jobs. The good news is, I'm sure this won't always be true, but for the most part, that's not actually the way reality works. What happens is you automate part of the job or you augment a human and let them focus on the more nuanced things, and the AIs can do the more repetitive tasks. And we've seen a lot of success there. And that's sort of basically in the cost cutting area. The other part is you've got maybe a limited resource that you would like to increase the capacity of. So it's basically some domain expertise where you have experts who are capable of working in a domain, whether it's healthcare or finance or insurance, and they're looking at information and making decisions or making predictions or even placing bets in one way or another. And the idea is like, hey, is there a way to either do this more accurately or more quickly, or just do it entirely automatically with artificial intelligence? And the answer again there usually is yes in some form or another along those different dimensions. And so I really think those are the ways most companies are thinking about initially: cost reduction on some repetitive task, or automating some more sophisticated bottlenecked part of the business.
Yeah, so you hit on a good point, meaning jobs aren't going to be replaced, and not in the cases that you've seen so far, and maybe it will, or people will pivot in the future. Can you give it? And you're saying repetitive tasks makes complete sense. Like let's let's not replace humans. Let's stop the humans from doing really manual, mundane tasks, and actually start doing right brain, and yet let the machines do all the repetition. Can you give specific examples? Do you have like I was reading through some of the material you had on your site. There was like Triumph. financial traction or automation, but you've also got like Potatoes USA and you're working with Defense Department. I mean, we're talking about like some pretty broad different industries. Like, give us a good example of like something super practical that might let people sort of really appreciate like, oh, okay, I know exactly what you mean when it comes to like automating kind of a repetitive task and the value that would provide.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think those are some pretty good ones to look at, because they're kind of so radically diverse. So, on the financial sector, we've helped companies like Triumph, like you mentioned. This is kind of this is really interesting. This is a blend of the two things I just talked about, where it's like cost reduction and improve sort of predictive capabilities. We've built systems that essentially automated a huge part of loan decisioning. And without going into the weeds, the idea is you're trying to just make a decision on whether to extend a loan, and you've got information about the maybe the individual's background and history and the amount of money and things like that. And that was a very, very manual process. It could take a day or two, and you have issues around chargebacks and defaults and, quite frankly, fraud. That's one of the major aspects of this particular problem. We worked really closely with them for a couple of years and built an automated system. And I'm super proud of this. So I'll share some little details. It is now doing like 75% of the decisioning. And instead of 24, 48 hours, it does it in 9 seconds. Now, the model actually makes its decision in, I think, 10 milliseconds, but to actually do the rest of it and tell the user it's 9 seconds. And um, fraud is down, chargebacks and defaults are down across the board, even higher than we expected coming out of the sort of the strategy analysis. And not a single person was laid off. They're using this to grow their business. And the people that were doing that before are still handling the really kind of gnarly edge cases, and the AI is handling the bulk of the work. And it's really just kind of one of those win-win solutions where it's like the customers get answers faster, fraud is caught earlier, humans are doing more interesting work and less repetitive work, and it's just a really win-win-win scenario that came out of that strategy engagement.
Remember back and I go, wait a second. So you're going to use an AI to make a decision on my financial future with all of this information. This is not private. This is not secure. Have we moved on from that? Like, is it now like actually we can be pretty transparent that it's like, yeah, we are using an AI and people have come to accept it and it's okay now?
I think so. They have been very direct, in fact, even in their shareholder letters each quarter about what they're doing, the amount that they're applying it, how they're applying it, and us providing specific numbers on the reduction of fraud and things like that. But I just go back to I remember back in the early 2000s, and I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about e-commerce and Amazon.com, and I remember they said, hell will freeze over before I'll give someone my credit card number on the internet, and you look back and it just things change. It's just always difficult. And I think it's especially difficult for people that maybe don't work in technology to be as like open to these things because it feels a little bit more like change for change sake sometimes, and that can get frustrating for users.
It's a little bit if you don't work in tech. It's also like someone throws that question at you, like, what would you rather? Sorry, do you want a human to go through all of this and then make a judgment call based on whether they're hungry or not? Because they might just be in a bad mood and they'll strike you out. Or do you want to do this properly?
Yeah,
And
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. But playing devil's advocate against myself, I will say this: we have to be really careful about these types of like decisioning systems because the last thing I want to be is living in a world where let's say I get denied a loan and the bank says, sorry, I don't know why, but the AI said so. So, that's just like a dystopia. And in this instance, we were super aware of that. And we did a bunch of things to make sure that wasn't the case. The primary of which is everything we did on this decisioning process is explainable. So if the model does say no, it will tell you why, and it will point to specific reasons. And then a human can get involved and say, hey, look like this part of the form wasn't filled out, or like, hey, there was a duplicate invoice number or something like that. But it just can't be, yes or no, black box.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I was going to ask actually, to what extent do they do explainability? Because I just feel a little bit now like, yeah, good example where they could probably provide a better customer service now because they're not having people behind the scenes and a lot of costs associated with running the assessments. And instead they can work with people to be able to go like, look, it failed because of A, B, and C. Can you get this to me? And then we can reevaluate whether it's the
It's
right
exactly
approach.
right. Like their number one customer complaint was the customer had done something incomplete on the form and they didn't find out for 2 or 3 days. They're like, can't you just tell me immediately? Now you'll know in 9 seconds.
Yeah, perfect. Give us another example. I saw an example of like an e-commerce brand that was, or maybe it was a retail brand actually. It had a picture of a diamond, which was strikingly interesting for
Mhm.
me. Maybe as I come up to a 10-year anniversary of my wife that I need to purchase something for, but I don't know what it was. Um, but yeah, there was an example there, and that kind of struck me as an interesting use case. Have you got one there, or one of the other case studies that you were sharing?
Yes, yes, yes. We've done uh, well over 100 production engineering solutions. So we can talk about cancer prediction, satellite tracking. I mean, it's just kind of
Wow.
crazy the
Okay.
different domains. But
Yeah, let's do
sticking.
this. This is a better idea. You're at a
Okay.
dinner party and someone turns to you and goes, "Ron, tell me a good AI use case story. Like, what's your favorite one that you're
Okay.
like, either it's super purposeful or it's like the net result was so comical no one would believe it, or it had an amazing return on investment."
Yeah. Okay. So I've got one that I think hits all three of those, and
Okay.
this is definitely one of my like half dozen go to because I'm pretty proud of it.
Everyone's like, "Is
So-
this the cancer one? Please be the cancer one. Is it the
And
cancer
it's the
one drum?"
cancer one. It is the
Yes, it's
cancer.
the we didn't even set this up. This is awesome. This is what we really needed AI to solve from the very start. It's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I got into it. And I was like, look, if you automate my accountant out of a job, I'm super happy. But can you also please cure cancer? That would be really, really great.
Exactly. And that is a perfect example of why I got into AI, right? It wasn't you know, to automate, document information extraction or something like that, right? I mean, that's meaningful, but it's not what gets me up in the morning. Um, this is such a great project. Very briefly to kind of set the stage, what's awesome about this project is it's not cancer prediction or cancer identification, it's cancer prediction, it's the risk. And so there's a metric out there called the Tyrer-Cuzick metric, and this is the gold standard within breast cancer. And it's been around for decades, and it's got all kinds of known issues. It was trained on a highly skewed um, um, clinical basis, meaning mostly white North American women, et cetera. It's no, I mean, the authors themselves, when they published it, knew that there were issues with it. Um, what's amazing about this project came out of some joint research out of MIT and Mass General. With I won't go into too much of the details, but we built a computer vision system capable of looking at mammograms, X-rays, mammograms, and just from the visuals, it can accurately predict the risk of breast cancer in women 5 years in advance. And what's crazy about that is there's no breast cancer in these images. If you look at the images, if an oncologist or radiologist looked at these images, they would say, yeah, you're all clear. We don't see any sign of warning. The computer vision model is picking up on visual biological signs of cancer at a superhuman level. And we don't understand deeply what it is. But the clinical trials we went through were exhaustive. We have data from around the globe. We had to build this really incredibly gnarly federated learning system to even train the models because the data was so spread out and the data couldn't move. It had to stay where it was for privacy information. reasons. So we had to push the models around the world. And that model is now at the FDA for approval. And the beautiful thing about this is, if we can get this approved and out into the world, which we think it'll be this year, over a 10-year period, we might save 1 million lives just by identifying the risk that a woman has for breast cancer years in advance. And it's a quantum leap in accuracy compared to the standard that's used right now every day in the world.
Talk me through how this can go faster. So, like, where did it start? When was it sort of published or come out? You said it could be approved by the FDA this year. Give us like a bit of a timeline just so we get our heads around, like, this is like a breakthrough that they came up with. MIT and Mass General came up with this breakthrough when, and then they're working with you. Like, how?
Good question. I think the win was roughly 2018, 2019, and it was sort of a prototype. And frankly, when we got involved, I was like kind of skeptical. Would this even be possible? It's an example of like where sometimes when we approach to do something and I'm like, I think AI can do that, but I'm not sure. And the hardest part about this from sort of a data perspective was if you're going to make a model predict something in the future, as far as half a decade in the future, you have to have clinical longitudinal data spanning at least a decade, right? Because you have to know what the results were from predictions made years ago. And amassing that data set was, just an incredible challenge. We ended up with, many, many, many terabytes of training data across the world. But I've just got to share a couple of funny things that happened along the way. So the model, one of the things we didn't want to do was replicate any of the sort of ethical bias issues with the existing standards. So we made sure that it's, racially and ethnically super diverse. But the other thing is, one of the real challenges with deep learning artificial intelligence is sometimes you think the model's learning one thing, but you're actually teaching it to learn something else. And that's because it's so black boxy, it can't always tell you what it's learning. And so we knew from previous experiments that if you let the model, these types of models, it could start picking up on the version of software that the mammograms were done on. Because when people are diagnosed with cancer, they'll go to better machines, right? And so age also correlates with cancer. High blood pressure, being overweight, all these correlate. And we didn't want the model to use any of that. We wanted it to just focus on the visual biological cues associated with pure cancer. And so during the development of this, we actually found the model could make predictions crazy accurate on all these. And what we did was we made the model predict not just the risk of breast cancer, but these other dimensions as well, so that we could tell. And we even had a call with the Stanford where they were saying, "Hey, are your AI models learning some stuff you don't want them to learn too?" And we're like, "Oh my God, yeah." And so what we did was, along those other dimensions, whether it's race or mammogram machine or high blood pressure or whatever they may be, for every one of those, we punished the model for getting the answer right and essentially forced it to get really bad at it and be no better than just random guess, but stay superhuman level at predicting the risk of breast cancer.
Wow. And so we're talking when we're talking about this, because you mentioned like blood pressure and like, body composition and these sort of things. So it's not taking that into account. It's literally looking at the image and then it can forecast forwards the potential for cancer as a result. And do you have like a rough idea of how accurate it is? Because obviously
Yes.
this is a pretty sensitive topic. If you
Yes.
were like 5 years in advance and you were like, well, we're pretty sure based on this AI that you're going to develop breast cancer, and it was wrong, that's a life-changing problem. So
That's right.
how accurate are we talking?
So it's a great question. Before I get to that too, because I think it will make the answer really make more sense. There's a balance in any type of sort of binary prediction scenario where you're balancing between like false positives and false negatives. And based upon the situation, you may want to lean one way or the other. So, for example, with breast cancer, interestingly enough, I would rather get a false positive and go have follow-on examinations and be told I didn't have breast cancer than be told you're everything's fine. I actually had cancer. It's just sitting there metastasizing, right? So in this situation, we knew this going in that was going to be sort of a balance that we needed to mix. The other thing is that you can actually right now build a breast cancer risk prediction model and be 99% accurate by just saying no. You will not have breast cancer in the next 5 years. No matter what you give me, just say no. Breast cancer is pretty rare. It only happens, at a very, very small frequency. And so this model would give the illusion of being accurate when in fact it's just always saying no. So there's a technique called F1 where you balance between these false positive, false negatives, and a model that always said no would get crushed on this metric because it would get all the negative cases correct and it would never be right on the positive cases. So using this sort of harmonic ratio F1, this model scores at, I think the last I saw it was like 0.76 or 0.77. And that is compared to the state of the art was like 0.61. So this is about a 20-year leap. If you look historically, this is about a 20-year leap in accuracy for something that is a very, very complex, biological process, and the model's only using, visual cues to make its predictions, which is astounding.
And this is potential to come out later this year?
It is potential to come out later this year. Unfortunately, we're hearing that it's just chaos right now within the FDA with a lot of the sort of government disruption that is occurring. So we're hoping this won't delay it, but it could.
That's absolutely unbelievable. I know that's a whole separate topic that we probably shouldn't spend too much to unpack, but the fact that the government is disrupting a potential breast cancer approval that could save millions of lives is borderline ridiculous. No, it's not even borderline ridiculous. I would swear and say it's absolutely fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, it's insane in my opinion.
So after that uplifting news, but if it does and we can get this done and this gets approved, this is a sensational step forward for humans and applying AI to proper life-saving techniques, which is what we really needed to do, and not have it create songs that'll ruin the music industry. Really, the whole reason why we started AI, let's get back to basics, was maybe prolong the human race and make us happier and a more thriving species so that people don't suffer. So that's a super exciting piece, and congratulations on the work so far. And I'm pumped to hear that hopefully when it comes out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will absolutely follow up and let you know.
Yeah, absolutely. They're essential. And hopefully there's no government slowdown as a result. I mean, I was going to ask you now about like measures of success for AI, but what's the point? Like, we've just already talked about the measure of success for AI is like how well could we implement better life-saving and use cases that aren't just about cost saving. Like obviously these are bread and butter and you guys are clearly capable of doing that. But do you have in the works other super exciting passion, humanity caused initiatives that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm really happy to say that we almost always have something like that going on, partly because we have an initiative we call AI for Good, where we do pro bono work. So, we're helping nonprofits with, for sort of human trafficking and things like that, right? We are working with student-led nonprofit organizations to help design. This is an amazing one. Here's another one in the healthcare. Helping design sort of novel cancer therapies. And what's amazing about this one is it's all predicated on some work that came out of DeepMind a few years ago. There's a model called AlphaFold, and it's able to do, just breathtakingly accurate protein fold prediction. And that's really important because we all learned in high school, proteins are the building block of life, et cetera. It is not exaggeration. And if we can understand how proteins are formed from the underlying amino acid sequence, not only can we um, do incredible things sort of in the clinical world, but with these AI advancements, we can do them millions of times faster. So it used to be you wanted to know how one particular protein amino acid sequence formed and what the shape was. It was like a PhD level project. You might take 7 years on that. There are now open source models that you can just stick in amino acid sequence, and before you can go get a cup of coffee, you'll have the answer. And so we've worked with groups to do hackathons, to go build novel target proteins that are looking for like a very, very, very specific receptor, like on a T cell. And that project is in the final stages. We had, I think, 64 different countries compete, and this is all, open source software. We're synthesizing the submissions. We had 20,000 sort of high quality sequences submitted, and we should know by May of this year, 2025, which ones the best are. And we're going to give out an award. I'm going to have the winners on our podcast to talk about it in detail. And that's insane. I mean, not only is it just kind of cool, but this would have been literally like science fiction fantasy 5 years ago, that we could do high level protein folding prediction, let alone do it for free as a weekend hackathon with open source
It's
software.
incredible. But what's that for the average person? Like understanding protein fold and T cells and amino acids and that. What does it mean to the average person? Does it mean improved medication, improved diet, improved health screening? Like what could that mean by working this out?
It's all that and much, much more, because proteins are essentially the the sort of the dominant molecular structure of our biology, and really all biology on Earth. It's going to come into everything. It's a part of every part of life, and so we're going to use it to, as I already said, increase the speed which we can develop novel clinical therapies. So an example that would be, you combine our ability to sequence entire human genomes in like 20 minutes now, right? It took a decade in the 90s to do one. Now we can do an entire one in 20 minutes. We'll have like laser specific therapies where we'll say, oh, you're sick. Here's your genome. We understand the nuances of your own biology. Here are the uh, nuances to the specific cancer that you're dealing with. Let's go take these two things into consideration and on the fly develop a novel therapy that's optimized for those two specific facts, neither of which would
Oh my
have been even
God.
knowable, 20 plus years ago. And that's just one tiny example. We're going to use this for improving crop yields, fighting diseases that we don't even have therapies for now. Like think about viruses and stuff like that. So I could wax on about this. This is one of the areas that you might be able to tell I'm pretty passionate about. Computational
Yeah.
biology is about to explode. I think it's one of the areas you're going to see AI have the biggest impact over the next 10 to 15 years.
You know when when your grandparents were alive and you asked them questions and you were trying to picture what their life was like and you were like, wow, you guys suffered from like polio and an outbreak of
Tuberculosis
things
and
that like
polio.
tuberculosis, yeah, that couldn't be solved. And like you go back to ancient times and they like died from certain diseases that you just think, that's incredible that we never solved those things. And now we have immunizations for a lot of them. Don't you get the sense like cancer, motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, all these things, maybe one day we will be talking to our kids and they were like, or their kids. And we would go, well, in our day, people would get cancer. And it was like, well, you might survive, you might not. You got to do this radical chemotherapy that nukes everything in your body to try and figure out what cells can we kill, which ones are bad. And I'm hopeful that this is like why we're working with AI. This is like, forget the doom and gloom and how it's coming for everyone's jobs, but how this actually could be applied for the right reasons. And this is one of the reasons why I do the podcast. So I'm glad you're going into the details. But don't you think we can't be that far off from what you're saying? We're getting really close.
We are getting incredibly close, and it's funny because I worked at a biotech startup in the 90s, and we were building high-speed DNA sequencing software and hardware. And like I said, it took a decade to sequence one genome. And I remember thinking, one day in the 2020s, can you imagine if we could sequence an entire genome, like, I don't know, in a month, a year, I don't know. And now, like I said, it's 20 minutes. And so
That's incredible.
it's just really, it's really common. My experience for me that things that you think will happen, you'll be like, oh, we're 10 years away from this. And then 10 years comes and it didn't happen. And you almost give up and you don't realize that, well, it was actually just 15 years. And then you're there. And all of a sudden, things that you had kind of given up hope for, next thing you know, you're taking them for granted. And you're like, well, yeah, of course we can do this and that. But what I really want are these things that are 10 years away. So I'm excited that AI is constantly having the goalposts move on it. We're talking about artificial general intelligence and AGI. I don't think anybody in the 1950s would argue that we have AGI right now, but we've raised the standard so much, and I think, correctly so, that it's a legitimate point of contention. But I think I'm very optimistic. Frankly, some things have happened in the last 90 days that have changed my perspective on this, and I think we're much closer to AGI than I realized a few months ago.
Does that scare you, or are you excited by this? Isn't AGI, like for everyone that doesn't understand, AGI is artificial general intelligence, correct me if I'm wrong, and it's the ability for the computer to reason at a level beyond a human. It can act like a human. It can be rational and makes decisions. It can be emotional. It can do whatever the hell it wants. Again, here it is, optimism with the dark cloud hanging
Yeah.
above. It can be
Yeah.
like, wow, this is incredible. We can cure all these things. Or it could also mean the computer can go rogue and go, don't need humans anymore. Let's start working out our own race and get rid of them.
That's exactly right. And, I'm definitely not going to pretend that I know how this will shake out. I absolutely am deeply optimistic that there is a path where we can have the power of these artificial intelligence systems, or, AGI, artificially general intelligence systems, that have human level or superhuman level cognition without that doomsday scenario. I truly do not believe that those are sort of logically preordained outcomes or anything like that. I can see scenarios where that would happen, but I really think that that those incredibly powerful reasoning systems are going to accelerate science and engineering in a way. And you'll hear, kind of optimistic AI guys like me talk about abundance and stuff like that. And the idea is that, like you said, all these common diseases and um, all these things that make life, difficult or short, and when right now we don't know how to address that, we're going to be able to address that. And then you layer in the fact that the roboticists are making incredible gains all of a sudden, in a large part because of the explosion in AI for controlling these systems. We could be in a world in 25 years where, backbreaking labor is not a thing anymore, right? It's just there are humanoid or other type of robots that can do all of that labor for us, and you couple that with the abundance, and maybe we're in this other type of dystopian world where we're like, we have too much free time, right? And we don't know how to kill the day, right? But I would much rather, deal with those challenges in the future than, having, children die of malnutrition in some parts of the world, right? It's a better challenge to have.
Yeah, that's the spot on point, isn't it? It's like, if there is suffering, let's cure the suffering. And whether we get to the problem where we have too much time on our hands, that would be a really nice problem to have. I know I always used to joke around and it was like, well, this could be the year that technology finally comes in and we only have to work 30 hours a week because that's been predicted forever and everyone's working longer than we ever have. But maybe one day we'll get to it. My only concern, and I know we've got to wrap soon, my only concern is, do you fear that the commercial models, is there any fear that like we're going to come up with a cure for something? A skeptic would say, yeah, but someone that owns the patent or whatever will kill it off because they want to sell the drugs for the whatever, the WhatsApp, whatever, based on a commercial model, or they won't make it available. Pharmaceutical companies have kind of been known in the past of being able to come up with disease cures for medication, and they wouldn't give it away for free and people died as a result. Is that the same thing that's going to happen in AI? Do you think there's like issues with commercialization?
I really hope not. I, of course, cannot predict the future, but I can point to the entire history of our artificial intelligence and show that partly because I think it was academic based, meaning a lot of the leading developments came out of academia. So the people that were working on it sort of just had a natural, um, uh, uh, you know, reflexive action to publish what they did.
Yep.
But if you look at like take OpenAI, they come out with ChatGPT, blows the world away at the end of 22. And it looked like, I'd say all of 23, it looked like we might be in a scenario where a handful of these frontier labs are going to control AI. And the reason is that the amount of money needed to compete was in the billions. I mean, OpenAI has famously raised, individual rounds where there was like 60 billion in capital. And flash forward now to 2025, and there are open source models that people are running on a couple of, Mac Ultras at home that are state of the art. And I think that there is, in open societies like America, there is just this built-in reflex to fight against centralization, and um, at least so far, there has not been any of that sort of, monopolization of either the technology or the data or the approaches or the talent. And one of the best examples of that is looking at OpenAI. All the original founders, right? As, as soon as they kind of figured out what the next approach was going to be for these reasoning models, they all left and started their own companies, right? And so we're seeing almost the opposite. It's the dissemination of this information. And I will always be shocked that it was a Chinese company, DeepSeek, that was the first to publish the training recipe for a reasoning model. And it's so unbelievably simple. And it's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about the future of AI is because we're already seeing other open source frontier labs like Allen Institute for AI replicate those results and saying, yeah, this is legitimate. And it's really, really having a great impact on my opinion, on the entire AI ecosystem.
So the open source or open nature and open culture of AI development is what gives you the most amount of optimism. I mean, you sold me on it, and you're right. I think the more we can make this open and explainable, and the more each other can learn from each other as we're working with these AI models, the better we'll be. And then applying them to different industries, to different cures, and then, yeah, keeping it as open as possible, I think is, you're summarizing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just to maybe just add one more example, like part of the reason pharmaceutical companies are able to do things like develop a therapeutic and then not release it, is because to develop these clinical drugs so far to date takes billions of dollars. The investment is just insane, right? And now, like we already talked about AI, open source models are eliminating like 80% of that cost with open source models. And so I think we could potentially live in the world that's not too far away where it's not that, AI becomes monopolized, but AI breaks down existing monopolies. And that is not, that's not something that's far-fetched. It really, really, truly could happen. And pharmaceutical companies are just one example.
I'm so glad we've had this conversation. I really feel more optimistic about the future. I think there's a little bit too much reading going on that's a bit too doom and gloom and the world's going to end. And so it's nice to have a conversation where you're sharing some real insight about how AI is going to help us in the future from a medical perspective, even for my kids growing up to think that maybe, they maybe won't have to worry about breast cancer or other diseases because we're progressing AI in the right path and we're keeping it open. As we close, I've got just two final questions for you that I would love to know. You're someone that strikes me, you've worked in this industry for such a long period of time. Who would be your key people to learn from? Like if you were genuinely interested in AI, like whether it's a podcast that you love listening to or an author or just some key resources that you think that people should keep an eye on?
That's a great question. One of my really new favorites is Nathan Lambert. He's with the Allen Institute of AI. He has a blog series and a podcast, and he does really deep dives on large language models. And there are a lot of people out there that just kind of skim the surface. And so if you're really, really interested in the nitty-gritty details, he's wonderful. If you want to stay a little bit higher level, but still kind of uh, uh be kind of be in the know about all the most important advancements that are happening out there. I'm doing a self plug. We have a podcast called Hidden Layers, and every single month I get together with some of the unbelievably talented engineers that I work with, and we literally talk through. We don't tell each other what we're going to talk about because we want to surprise each other, and we go through and we talk about the big announcements or changes or whatever's happening in AI and just have a dialogue. And so if you want to kind of stay up on the bleeding edge without having to read 100 white papers a month like we do, check it out. It's Hidden Layers.
Awesome. I'll check it out for sure. I actually did see a bit of a snippet of an episode and I actually really enjoyed it. So it was something to subscribe. So it was a bit of a loaded question. And then the last question for you, Ron, is I want you to finish this sentence. And it can be, you can say whatever you want. And I didn't preempt you for this, but we always ask the guests, AI will ...
I'm not exaggerating here. I truly do believe this. I think AI will be the largest, most important, most positively impactful technological revolution of our lifetimes. And if we're smart and thoughtful, I think we can build a world that will be amazing for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren.
Well, that's pretty. When do you think this will be? Where is there a tipping point?
I think, you know what? I'm not kidding, Dave. I think we are really close to that tipping point. My bet now is closest probably 2026, 27. At the furthest out, I think 2030, we should have these um, incredibly powerful AGI models that have complex reasoning ability. And at that point, not only can they solve, existing tasks for us, but um, when they're able to do original science and research and discover breakthroughs on their own, that's when it will check the box for me for AGI.
It's such an incredible time to be alive. Like my brain is going a million miles an hour as I think about it. My daughter at school was asked, what was the most important breakthrough in the last 75 to 100 years? And you just sat there and you went through it all. And I went, I think what's going to happen next is probably going to be the biggest breakthrough. I just don't
Exactly.
even think we're close to, like, if you go back over 100 years, you're like, the invention of the computer.
Hmm.
So it's amazing. Hey, you've been such a interesting person to talk to. I really appreciate the fact that, we came in with a bit of a premise to talk about practical AI. And once you do that, you realize, yeah, practically we can do this, or we can do any of this stuff. We can apply models to task automation or repetitive functions, and we can drive costs down. But then we naturally progressed into a conversation that was just a little bit more interesting, which is like what the future is. And I just really appreciate you taking the time, being honest and opening up. And I really leave this podcast a little more optimistic about the future, knowing that someone like you is working with other leading AI thought leaders and practitioners. And if they're the people that are guiding where we're going, then we're in good shape.
Well, I appreciate those kinds of words, and I really want to thank you for having me on. This was just a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it the entire time.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear more when you drop the breast cancer bombshell. It's going to be an awesome one.
I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted.
Thanks for being on.